Welcome to the Flourishing Journey podcast as we facilitate a series called the AHA Leader. This series is dedicated to school leaders who are courageous enough to look in the mirror and curious enough to keep growing. Every leader has blind spots, those unseen areas that quietly shape our decisions, influence our teams, and affect our school culture in ways we don't always realize. Yet awareness brings clarity, and clarity brings growth. In each episode, we'll uncover common leadership blind spots, those hidden habits, assumptions, and patterns that may be holding us back. Together, we'll turn those blind spots into aha moments that lead to greater wisdom, stronger teams, and more flourishing schools. I'm your host, Rachael Jones, as I collaborate with Dr. Edward Bunn by inviting you to lean in, look deeper, and lead with fresh vision. Hello, flourishing practitioners. Welcome to the first episode of a 9-episode leader series on recognizing blind spots and making appropriate adjustments. Today's episode is called Ignoring Your Own Spiritual Formation, where we explore ways to ensure we as leaders intentionally focus on our own spiritual formation. Welcome back, Edward. I'm excited about this 9-episode leader series.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. I'm excited as well. I enjoy all things leadership and could talk days on leadership and specifically growth strategies around that. This is why it's great to have a 9-episode series so that we can really take a deep dive here in our blind spots.
All right, well, let's just dive right in with the first question. How do you integrate prayer, reflection, or spiritual disciplines into a busy school leadership schedule?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I see spiritual disciplines as a key component to our deep and very real relationship with Christ. So for me, it's far less about adding one more thing and really more about weaving those spiritual disciplines into what we're already doing. So what does it look like? So for me, prayer is a rhythm throughout the day. It's before a meeting. It's walking a hallway, or maybe responding to an email that needs wisdom. Don't hit send until you've prayed, right? So, I also guard, a window of quiet time at the start of my day. It's not extensively long, but it is enough to center in on scripture, to offer praise and surrender my plans to the Lord for the day, seek his wisdom, and even open doors to loving him and loving others well throughout the day. And I've often noticed that God gives those great opportunities. I think reflection's critical as well. Often for me, it happens at the end of the week when I ask some critical questions like, where did I sense God's presence? Where did I move ahead without Him? Reflection, I believe, is stronger when we both recognize, but we also make the appropriate adjustments. So there's recognition, there's understanding, but also the appropriate adjustments. And at the end of the day, spiritual formation isn't another box to check. It's really a way to keep leadership anchored in the dependence of Christ rather than on me, on ourself. And then ultimately, spiritual formation is for the glory of Christ.
I love that. I love what you said about just weaving it into our day, because we are so busy. So it's hard when it's just another thing. But if we see exactly like what you said, just it becomes the natural rhythm of our day, just weaving in prayer, weaving in those reflection times. So that's so good. Such a good reminder. Well, can you share a time when neglecting your own spiritual life affected your leadership or decision making?
Oh, ouch. That's a transparent question there. Yeah, I mean, I love being transparent, open, and honest. Let's see. So, there was a season when the demands of school life, when I was ahead of school, those demands were, I guess, relentless, if you will, accreditation, budgets, personnel issues, and I was kind of living as if I was saying, um, I'll catch up with God later. And over time, I noticed that my number one, this happens all the time when I do this, is my patience began to grow thin. My discernment became clouded. I was leading on empty. Um, and so a small decision like how I handled a staff conflict became, I guess, more reactive instead of redemptive in nature. And in that moment, when I was in that season, it reminded me that leadership without spiritual depth becomes just management. It's no longer ministry. It's no longer this true shepherding experience. And I believe that God really used that season to draw me back to number one, abiding first, and then acting second. When I'm spiritually dry, it always shows in how I treat people. It shows in how I make decisions. Also I'd say applicable here, but also in other areas of leadership. A while back I created a list that answers the following. I'm not at my best when, and I began to fill in the blank. So I'm not at my best when. So and I have about 10 to 12 key responses to this prompt. And I revisit this list regularly. Matter of fact, it's right here beside my computer. I revisit this list regularly to help me stay in the best lanes of leadership. And in this case, the topic we're talking about today, my spiritual formation.
Well, thank you for your transparency. I'm sure many of our listeners could relate to what you shared, especially the I'll catch up with God later. How many times have we probably all done that? But so important. I love the practical thing that you do with those prompts. I'm not at my best when. So just a reminder to lean into God during those times. So let's move on to what accountability and mentorship. What role do you think accountability and mentorship play in keeping your spiritual life healthy?
Yeah, your first statement is solo leadership is broken. Not only is solo leadership broken, it is not biblical. So I would say that accountability, mentorship, feedback are all essential to leadership growth. We all know that leadership can be isolating, and isolation is where drift happens. Isolation is where doubt occurs. Isolation is where, fill in the blank. A lot of broken things happen there. So, I personally have a small circle of trusted peers, leaders who love me enough to ask the hard question, like, how is your soul? Not just how is your work? I also have a mentor that's outside of my workflow, outside of my organization, if you will, who helps me see patterns that I might miss, my own personal blind spots. Um, and I've learned over time that accountability simply isn't about control. It's about companionship, it's about community, it's about collaboration. Um, and these are all key components to our leadership journey. We weren't designed to carry spiritual burdens alone. An honest community in the context of accountability and mentoring keeps our hearts soft and our priorities align with God's priorities.
That's a great reminder, especially for leaders. I think sometimes it's hard for us to think that maybe we need to reach out. And I love that it doesn't have to be just when we need help, but it's really supposed to be kind of back to that rhythm of our life is that we should have others in our lives that we are regularly meeting with and asking them to mentor us and to hold us accountable. So yeah, thank you for that reminder. Well, we're going to wrap this up with one more question.
Yeah.
What practical advice would you give a leader struggling to prioritize their own spiritual growth without feeling guilty?
Hmm. That's good. Um, I think maybe start small, but be consistent. Um, Guilt often comes from comparison, thinking that our spiritual life has to look like somebody else's. So instead, find what connects you most deeply to God and commit to that. Even if it's just 15 focused minutes a day to begin with, and then let that continue to grow over time. And just a good reminder is time with God isn't, a withdrawal from your leadership. This is not a secular sacred divide here. So we're not withdrawing from our leadership to spend time with God. It's actually the most strategic investment in our leadership. And so seeing it that way, instead of an add-on, it's integrative in nature. Our teams, I'd say our students, our school communities, they need leaders who lead from overflow, not exhaustion. So just my last challenge here is give yourself grace. God's more interested in the direction that you're going than your personal perfection.
Thank you so much. This is only our first episode, and I'm already enjoying our conversation together. It's great reminders today about not neglecting spiritual formation, but like you said, just ending on that note. Just it's not one other thing that we just check off. It's not something we have to do. It's something that we get to do, and give ourselves grace as we do that. So thank you for being with us today. And thank you, leaders, for joining us as we have talked about cultivating spiritual formation in ourselves.
Yeah, thanks for having me here. And I love being able to do this and just speak in this form or format to our listeners and viewers. Surround yourselves with trusted people that will help you pull back those blind spots and be more like Christ daily.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, join us next month where we continue our leadership series with episode 2 called Resistance to Feedback, where we explore strategies for receiving and implementing healthy feedback as leaders.
This episode was part of a 9-part series called The Aha Leader, uncovering common leadership blind spots and turning them into aha moments that lead to greater wisdom, stronger teams, and more flourishing schools. Catch every episode of this series and the entire Flourishing Journey podcast at acsi.org/podcasts.